I'm going to demonstrate here the process I'm going to go through to make a piston pin puller. That is a little tool to pull the piston pin here in my right hand in through the piston. These are usually a fairly snug fit, like you can see here, and I'm not one to hammer on this end. I know some people may do that, but you can buy commercially made piston pin pullers. I don't know if you can buy one that's small enough for this piston, but in wrist pin. But what I'm going to do is I took an inexpensive deep socket. I went through my socket collection, and like most people, I have, or most of us that have been wrenching for a while, you probably have a lot of odds and ends sockets. So I found this, I don't even know what brand it is. It's a 7mm deep socket, and if you look at the end here, it's a nice fit just to the inside. See if I can get a shot of that for you. Just to the inside of the wrist pin itself. Gudgeon pin, I think some of you, our cousins over in the UK call it Gudgeon pin. You can see it just is a slightly smaller than the outside diameter of the pin, which is what I want, because I'm going to use this socket to pull that pin into that piston when it's mounted on the bike, so that I don't have to wheel on it with a hammer or some other method. In order to do that, I've got to come up with a means of pulling this in, because I'm going to be pushing against the face of the pin itself, and I'm going to use this inexpensive, I think that's a 6mm, it is metric, bolt that's long enough, and you have to have a bolt that's long enough to extend all the way through, and you'll see what I mean by that a bit later. However, the problem I have is this hardware store bolt, and I didn't have this in my inventory, by the way. I just went through my stuff and I found this long bolt, which is just about the right length, I think. And what I need to do, because this won't go through the inside of that socket, I need to drill out the inside of that socket there, right there, to allow this bolt to pass through. If I do this correctly, it will not affect the ability to use this socket in the future, because where the 1/4" drive ratchet would snap into it right here is going to be unaffected by what I'm going to do next, because I'm going to bore that hole larger, deeper down inside, and I think it won't affect the use of the socket at all. Not that I use a 7mm deep very often. The only other concern I might have is, will I have enough threads? I think I will here, enough depth, and if not, I can continue to thread this. I do have dies suitable for 6mm threads like that. But I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. What I'm going to do next is put this in the lathe, and I'm going to drill that opening out. Now, in order to know what size to drill it to, I'm going to just use my inexpensive caliper here, and I'm going to set it to inch because my drills are inch. Zero it out, and now I'm going to measure the outside diameter of the bolt. It's 2.229 inches. I'm going to lock that down. And now I'll go get a few drills and see if I can find one that's at least that big, probably 0.2303132, something like that. So I went over to my drill index, and I buy only good quality drills. I buy these from a local tool supplies industry in our area. These are American made. I think they're Norseman drills, but I only buy good quality drills. I don't even bother with hardware store, big box store drills. These, believe it or not, are not much more expensive. They hold an edge a lot better than inexpensive imported drills. They can be resharpened if you need to. So I don't mess around with inexpensive drills. Nonetheless, we're looking for at least 0.229. So So this happens to be, I think, 1/4 of an inch. Let's see what that measures. And that's 0.246, so obviously that one's plenty large. 0.232, that is a 15/64 drill right there. Set that aside. That's probably the one I'm going to use. Yeah, and that's too small. That's a 7/32. So I'm going to use this 15/64 or 0.231232 drill bit to drill out the inside of this socket. So I'm going to go set up at the lathe. I'll bring you over there and you can watch the process. Here we are over at the lathe, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to chuck this socket up in the 3-jaw chuck. You will note I've got these copper jaw protectors. These are designed to protect the finish of the part being clamped. Now, it's not a big deal in this case with this inexpensive second-hand socket, but I'm going to use them anyway. And this is just a piece of copper pipe that I think it was 1-inch copper pipe. I cut it off, as you can see here, into 3 sections, split it, and then I just slip it over the jaws like that, and it protects the finish of whatever it is I'm going to be turning. I'm going to go ahead and chuck this up now. I don't know if you remember or you saw the video where I made this chuck key some time ago. This is a homemade chuck key that I made with some stock that I had on hand. So I'm just going to go ahead now and put this in the 3-jaw and tighten it up. Take it out of back gears. There. I had back gears apparently for another operation at one time. Here's that 15/64 drill that we're going to use to drill through like this. So I'm going to go ahead now and chuck that up in the tailstock chuck, Jacob's chuck. I'm going to eject it like that, and I'm just going to go around and tighten it up. I tighten all 3 holes just to make sure that when the jaws pull down on the drill, it's concentric. Pull the drill bit right up against the face of the item to be drilled, and we're about ready to go. Now in terms of speed, I'm going to use a medium fast speed on this. This is a relatively small drill bit. Smaller the bit, the faster you typically would spin the part. So I'm going to use a medium fast speed on this. I do not have a tachometer on this machine like I have over on my mill, so I'm not sure the exact RPM, but I'll go by eye and by feel. The first thing I'm going to do, put a little lubricant on there. You will notice I have removed my jewelry and rolled my sleeves up to prevent anything getting caught up in these spinning parts. I'm going to turn the lathe on, adjust the speed, and then I'm going to feed it in with the hand wheel on the end of the tailstock, which I think is probably just about out of view right here. Here we go. That was easy. back the tailstock out of the way. I'm going to take the bolt. Perfect. There's nothing to that. Really, I just more or less relieved the inside of that socket so that slides through freely. So now that we've got a nice sliding fit there, we'll take these parts back over to the bench and we'll continue on with assembling of the. Here's the basic components I've assembled to create the piston pin puller, besides the bolt that we just talked about and the socket that'll act as a puller. And you don't have to do it exactly the way I'm doing it. You can use whatever you have in your shop that gets you to the end result that I'm going for here. I'm just using bits and pieces and parts that I had, leftover hardware that I had in my shop to make this puller. It's really a one-off kind of deal for these little pistons. First thing we have to contend with is the fact that when we put the piston pin in, and it'll start like that, I can't initially pull it with a socket because the bolt isn't long enough. You can see there, the bolt's not long enough. So I came up with an alternative. I'm not going to start with the socket. I'm just going to use the bolt, and over the end of the bolt that will bear against the piston pin like that. I just went through my stuff and my hardware, and I found a washer and a nylock nut that's slightly bigger than a bolt. These are probably imperial sizes. I'm not sure. I didn't check them. You can see how that came out. That then will slip over initially over the pin, which will then go into the piston like that. So the right side now is complete. On the left end, I'm going to have to make up a little space here, obviously, because I got to bear against the piston. You'll see what I mean in a moment. So I just went through and grabbed an 11 millimeter socket that'll act as something to pull against on the piston, like that. A couple of washers that I'm going to stack over the top of that. And then a 6 millimeter nut, because this bolt is a 6 millimeter bolt. And that essentially becomes my first stage of the puller. And when I mount it on the bike, I will center everything so that it's appropriately centered. I don't want to pull off center. And then what I will do is I will hold this end with a wrench and probably put a socket on this nut and tighten the nut, thereby pulling this pin that way. Eventually, once the piston pin gets in far enough, I'll take this apart, replace it with this socket, and re-rig it. Whether I'll need to use this or not, I'm not sure. But the reason I'll use a socket at that point is, let me take this apart. The socket will allow me to go all the way down into the piston like that to make sure I pull the pin. Again, this is slightly smaller here than this. Allow me to pull the pin in all the way. And then I can finesse it from there back and forth if I need to. So that's basically the setup. Again, use whatever you have in your shop. You can just use this for a guide or inspiration, if you will. The details exactly of how you make yours, if you need to do this, is not important. The concept is, though, and that is that you have to find a means of pulling this pin in without just hammering on the end of it and putting a twist on the connecting rod and all your new bearings, if you've got new bearings, and you want to pull against that pin. That's the concept. So that's really it for this video, I believe, at this point, and that's showing you how I have made my little simple piston pin puller. Say that 3 times quickly. And we'll demonstrate using this on the YL1 when it gets to the point of actually installing the pistons. As usual, thanks for watching.